I'm Sue Anderton, the founder and executive director of the Maze Group. And in this webinar today, I'm going to be talking about anxiety, helping us to understand what anxiety is and how to develop strategies for helping and supporting children and young people who struggle with anxiety. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can have a look at the slides as I speak. So here we are, Sue Anderton, that's me, and the Maze Group is my company. So it's just about understanding anxiety in this first in the series of 3 total webinars. Each webinar can be watched individually, or you can watch all 3, which complement each other, hosted by my colleagues. So firstly, to understand what anxiety actually is. So anxiety comes from a region in the brain called the amygdala, deep in the brain. And it is mostly connected with feelings of fear and anxiety. And it's a primitive part of the brain whose job is to prepare us to survive. And we need to have fear and anxiety in order to help us stay alive, see a danger, and act accordingly. So it's our fear response when we see something dangerous. It's an alarm system that alerts us to the fact that we're in danger and that we need to take action. So this then provokes a sense in us of one of these responses, this fight. You're going to fight your way out of it. Flight, you're going to run away, or freeze, you're going to be like a rabbit trapped in headlights and you can't say anything, you can't speak, you feel paralyzed. And everybody feels anxiety at some time, which is a good thing. We need to feel that. And its job is to prepare us. So the amygdala triggers this initial response in us, a primitive response of fear and anxiety. Once we sense that fear, sometimes we act instinctively with fight, flight, and freeze. And sometimes what we're able to do is then engage our thinking cognitive brain to problem solve what to do. So say, for example, I'm driving down the motorway and a lorry swerves into my lane. My stomach lurches and my skin goes clammy because my amygdala has triggered a danger, a fear response. But what I'm quickly able to do is use my problem-solving brain to think I'm either going to brake and let that lorry go past, I'm going to accelerate to go past it, or I'm going to check my mirror and move over into the next lane. So I'm able to then take logical action to keep myself safe. So this is what anxiety and fear is all about, very closely connected, and we need to have them. They're part of the human condition. So there can be a number of different causes of anxiety disorders. So here are the ones that we know mostly about. So there's definitely a genetic component. So if anybody related to the child, if parents or siblings or somebody in the extended family has a predisposition to anxiety, it's quite likely that some of those characteristics will be inherited. Many parents will know that children are often born with a very particular temperament. So anybody who has had 1 or more children will know that you can identify traits of their personalities right from the beginning. They're either a very placid baby or they were a very demanding baby. So you see those issues around temperament quite soon in a child's life. A second cause can be around early experiences. So here I'm thinking very much about babies maybe who've been born prematurely, or mums who've had postnatal depression, where there's been some kind of a hiatus in the relationship between mother and child from a very early age. And this is what we know causes problems with attachment that can lead to issues about anxiety. But it might just be that you were living in stressful circumstances and your child became anxious into their toddlerhood. So a lot of the early experiences really shape all of us in the way that we respond to fear and our anxiety responses. Of course, a big part of it is the environment that we grow up in, the expectations of our parents. And a big part of this is many of us, when we have children, you have a little fantasy in your mind about what this child is going to be like based on what you wish your child had been like or what you wish you were like as a child. So we have these expectations that we pass on to our children, our own expectations, and they can form a big part of anxiety, particularly if you're setting very high standards for your child and they're failing to achieve them. Those kinds of things can also link to a child's anxiety response. Anxiety can be a response to life events also. So it can be things that have happened that have caused fear. a child who has an encounter with an out of control dog at a very young age, who feels that who has been knocked over by a dog, but can often then grow up feeling very afraid of dogs. So some of those early experiences, before we can even really formulate our thoughts into language, can influence how anxious we feel into childhood and adulthood. And there are, of course, perceived beliefs about danger and threats. So we might have a perception that somebody who speaks very loudly is very dangerous. We might have a perception that somebody with a loud voice is going to be more likely to get us into trouble if we're at school, and tell us off. So there can be beliefs about things that accumulate over time for a number of reasons. And all of this is a complex relationship between biology and environment, this typical nature-nurture debate. So there are some different types of anxiety disorders as well. Some of them are listed here. Phobias, which are very, very deep-seated fears. And there are lots of people that have very deep-seated phobias about lots of different things. So one of the common causes of anxiety that I see amongst children is separation anxiety. So this is where a child feels safe with their primary caregiver, they feel safe and secure, but when they're separated, they feel anxious and fearful. So these are the children who struggle to settle in bed at night because they don't want to be separated from mum or dad, constantly finding excuses to come out of their bed and come down. It might be children who really, really don't want to go to school. These are the little ones that you're having to carry in crying, feeling very, very upset, and will be comforted if they have then another attachment figure at nursery or school that makes them feel safe and they can feel attached to. So separation anxiety is a very significant form of anxiety that many children experience. In the same way, generalized anxiety is very common too, particularly amongst the autism population, in my experience, in the sense that the child might discover something has happened, maybe there's been a burglary in the local area, and then worry and worry and worry that their own house will be burgled. And they keep worrying about that thing and keep talking about it with their parents until they hear another news story about there's been a fire somewhere. And then they switch to worrying about what if there's a fire near me. So these are the children who have an anxiety about something, but it's very difficult to comfort them because once you have tackled the reasons and thinking behind this anxiety, they switch to another topic to be worried about. So this is another anxiety disorder. So phobias, as I mentioned at the beginning, and one of the common phobias that we see amongst children on the autism spectrum and with any other additional needs is actually a social phobia, a real fear about being in crowds and groups of people. This is actually very common in the neurotypical population. Lots of people feel very uncomfortable going into a crowded situation, a social situation where they don't know anybody. And also commonly what I see in children with additional needs is a real fear of going to school. So school phobia and anxious school refusal come under this category also. Coupled with panic disorder. So quite a few different anxiety presentations can also come along with a sense of panicking about something. So you can have panic disorder on its own, but they're often coupled with other types of anxiety disorders. This is where the amygdala is taking over and you're losing contact between your thinking and rational brain and your ability to be able to make good judgments about things. So this is quite often what we describe in children as being a meltdown. And then finally, we have two other types of disorders: post-traumatic stress disorder, and again, deeply related to the amygdala, whereby a traumatic event has happened and some element of that event is triggered when the person hears some kind of symptom or trigger that reminds their amygdala of this awful trauma that they had. So it might just be a noise of something or the smell of something or a particular word. And OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is an extreme form of anxiety where the individual is trying to control all the tiny details of their life, washing and rewashing hands and worrying about germs, lining things up, having particular rituals to have to go through over and over again. So those are some of the common types of anxiety disorders that we see in children. Now, one of the most important things for any child is having a parent or an adult, a caregiver, whoever they're with, that is able to help them to manage and process their strong feelings. And I love this model from the Solihull approach. And the Solihull approach looked at how managing behaviour in children and young people is deeply connected to these two elements also contained in this model called containment and reciprocity. And these relate to the elements that there are in a child and parent relationship. Containment is one of the most important fundamental elements of a parent and child relationship. And it's an important element for a society. I think that we know very little about it, or we speak about it very little in any event, and we don't really understand its importance. So what containment basically means is as a parent, you absorb the strong feelings of your child, and then you repackage them and you give them back in a safe and controlled and manageable way. So what that looks like is if you have your baby that's crying and crying and crying and crying, instead of crying yourself and screaming, be quiet, we're all upset, actually your containing response is that you hold your baby and you pat your baby and you're rocking them and you're saying, there, you're just tired. You need to sleep and you'll be all right in a minute. That's good containing behaviour. Fast forward a few years and your child is coming out of school crying and raging about, it's so unfair, this happened today, I got put on the naughty step, or whatever. And your response is not, well, that's not okay, how dare they do that, I'm going to go and tell Mrs. So-and-so straight away. Good containment looks like you saying, oh dear, sounds like you've had a bad day, come on, let's go home and you can tell me about it. And we'll work out a plan for tomorrow. So even though you might feel distressed or angry or sense of injustice inside on behalf of your child, your job is to provide good containment for them, to absorb their strong feelings. And this is especially true around anxiety. That anxiety is very contagious. And if your child is anxious, it's very easy for you to feel a sense of elevated anxiety also. So this may be because you have a tendency to feel anxious yourself, remembering that I talked about genetics in the beginning, but it might just be that what you're noticing is the feelings that your child has given you. They're giving you their anxiety. And actually, if you could put that into words, what they would be saying is, I feel overwhelmed by my anxiety and I want you to help me with it. Please, here it is, you take it off me. And your job is to absorb it, repackage it, and then give it back in a safe and controlled manner by saying, you'll be fine, we'll work it out, we always do. So staying calm and being containing. And the other element in the Solihull approach is around reciprocity, which basically just means this two-way flow of communication between parent and child. So you might look at your child coming running out of school all distressed with a grey face and tear streaks, and you may understand, oh, they've had a bad day. What that means is I'm going to drop the idea of going to do the weekly shopping now. We'll just go home and have a calm evening instead. So you're reading and interpreting your child's behaviour, and then you're making adjustments to keep things calm and contained. And I think as parents often try to mask their own feelings of anger or distress or stress or anxiety. But this reciprocity feature of the child and parent relationship works two ways. So if you are feeling something, you will inadvertently be projecting that outwards, which can often lead to children then feeling more anxious or more unsettled. So my answer here is always, it's super important to think about your own well-being. Nobody can display compassion unless they experience compassion. Nobody can give or provide containment unless they are provided with containment. So if actually what you're wanting to do is help your child to manage their behaviour and manage their anxiety, thinking about this containment and reciprocity elements is a really, really important first step in helping your child to manage anxiety. So, how to support a child with anxiety? So, it's really important to provide accurate information. We don't want them to feel confused and we don't want them to feel ashamed, but we do want them to understand that everybody feels anxiety. We have to feel anxiety. And that in actual fact, what is happening is your alarm is going off a bit too early. So what we need to do is just reset that. And we have to do that in lots of different ways. Lots of different people have different kinds of anxieties, all of which to manage in very different ways. So just explaining what's happening for your child and letting them know that you will help them by giving them the right information, you will support them. So a second thing that's really good to try is to keep a record of all the, I've put good things, but what I mean is like brave and non-anxious things. I don't want to label non-anxious behavior as good and anxious behavior as bad, but actually what we want to do is help them to understand the positives about being brave is the way in which we set that alarm clock. Because once you experience something, you realize you can do it. Next time you come to do it, your fear and anxiety will be slightly less because you've done it before. So keeping a record of the things that they have done that have made you proud when they've been really frightened, but they've done it anyway. That's really worth knowing and really worth recording. Making sure that you set small steps goals towards a larger goal, with helping them to identify clear, consistent steps and rewarding every single little step. So say, for example, your child is terrified about leaving the house and actually want them to be able to go to the shop with you. So instead of just deciding, right, today's the day we're going to the shop, it would be much better to try to work towards that in a small steps way. So the first step could be, let's just go and step outside the front door. And then when we're comfortable with that in a time period that feels comfortable and right, let's try walking to the end of the pathway, to the gate. And when we've tried that, let's step outside the gate. And when we've done that, let's take 5 steps away from the gate. So you're constantly thinking about what are the steps that are going to enable us to achieve this one thing that is really quite challenging. And then keeping a record of those things and making sure that you build in rewards for when your child has been able to undertake those tasks. So teaching your child about anxiety is super important. So helping them to understand some of the things that I'm talking about here today about genetics and the relationships around them and all of the other issues that might be relating on their anxiety, for example, sensory processing difficulties. So helping them to understand that. And what you want to help them to learn is how to manage that independently in the end, so into adulthood. So teaching strategies around self-talk, like I've done this before, I can do it again, and I'm very brave, and things like that. And then little self-rewards. So even saying something like, well done me, or small little individual pats on the back, or those kinds of small tasks, small activities that you can teach your child that they can carry with them are really useful. And then finally, helping your child to recognize when they're feeling anxious. So are they able to identify that their heart is racing, that they're hot and clammy, that they're charging around very quickly, they're feeling very, very, very agitated? A lot of our children with sensory processing difficulties are not good at recognizing those internal signals. So it can be a really good idea to help them to learn those things. And that might mean doing things like running up and down the stairs and measuring your heart rate and seeing how fast your heart is beating, and then measuring it when it's calm. And then measuring the heart rate when you know that your child is feeling anxious, if you can. And then comparing those, because they will all look very different. So what you want your child to be able to distinguish is between my heart is racing because I've run up and down the stairs, but my heart is racing because I'm really worried. So helping them to recognize when they're feeling anxious is the first step. And then the second step will be around developing some calming strategies, so such as teaching some slow breathing. So here it can be really useful if your child is anxious, just sit with them and you focus on your own breathing, calm breathing, and encourage them to do the same. And then maybe conjuring up some pictures, images that you know will be calming. For example, stroking the dog, or holding your favorite toy, or walking around your favorite theme park, or any kind of activities or objects or tasks that you know make your child feel calm. talking about those things and encourage them to picture those things at a time of anxiety can be really useful. And here's what's also important. Anxiety can be reinforced by adults. For example, constant questioning, you okay? Do you want me to come with you? Those kinds of constant questions can reinforce to the child that there is actually something to be worried about. So another point is, for children who are anxious, parents can often become a little bit too involved, a little bit too directive, wanting to constantly check that they've done okay. Do you need my help? And for example, parents who are looking at the homework and then sitting with their children and doing it and making sure it's all correct before it's handed in. So some of those things can also help. That it plays into this reinforcement that there really is something for the child to worry about if the parent engages in those behaviours. Another one is avoidance. So you withdraw permission for your child to join in other age-appropriate activities for fear of their reaction. So you would immediately say, no, my child's not going on a school trip, or no, my child's not joining in this group activity, those kinds of things. And while it's absolutely fine, if your child really can't manage those things, they really can't manage them. But it would be a lot better to think about what strategies could be put in place to support your child, because of constantly avoiding stressful situations means that your child never learns to recalibrate their alarm anxiety. So it would be much better to think about, how can I support my child through this situation that is anxious, anxiety provoking? And another adult behavior that plays into this is giving excessive reassurance. So constantly reassuring the child that they're safe and they're okay, paying more attention to the anxious behavior than the non-anxious behavior. And then the final point here being relating back to what I was talking about with the Solihull approach about containment. You know, one of the things that it's very easy to fall into as a parent is becoming impatient, because your own stress and anxiety are building, and you find it really difficult to have headspace to help your child, which basically means you struggle to provide the correct containment for your child because you are becoming full up of your own stress and anxiety. So it's really worth noting this and then just reflecting upon, what is it that I need to be able to maintain a calm and containing presence? So when we get into this full-on panic mode, which I referred to earlier, this is often what we call a meltdown or shutdown. So the child either completely withdraws and can't speak, or they are completely melting down, which is an uber tantrum, more than a tantrum. So the first thing is to remember a time when you have ever felt completely overwhelmed by your own anxieties and emotions, and think about those are exactly the same conditions that our children need. So the first one, acknowledge that you see that they're overwhelmed. Just acknowledge that you can see it. And then think about just lowering all the demands. No demands right now. Lower your voice. Remember how important it is for you to remain calm, and try not to use too much language. Now, language is the tool that we use to explain things. It's such an essential tool for us. And there's such a strong connection between thinking and language. However, in meltdown, it can add to the already overburdened system that the child is experiencing. So it's really good here. You're just thinking about what we need to do is get back to calm. So it's low demand, minimal language, and a calm and quiet voice, and then reassure them that they're safe. It's okay. I'm here. We'll work it out. It's useful to have a little mantra, a little phrase that you might use, such as calm now, or steady now, or just breathe, or something really simple that you use at that time that will then help them to be calm at all other times as well. So you're training yourself not to use too much language because you're sticking to your one phrase. And then you have a phrase that you can use that your child understands what that means in all other situations. And then, of course, when your child is calming down, you just need to allow time for recovery. So once your child has calmed down and we're all okay again, is not the time to launch back into high demand. You need a time to be able to just get back to normal, just completely recover from the trauma of being so distressed before you're ready to take on any more demand or challenge. and then help your child to feel supported at a time when they're feeling very vulnerable. This is so important. And these things are a big part of the behaviours that form effective containment and reciprocity between parent and child. If you're acting in this way at a time of stress when your child needs you most, then that's when trust is built and reciprocity and containment are strengthened. So here's finally an activity that can work well. If you have a child who is worrying about something and they want to talk about it all the time, it can be really good to limit the amount of time that you're spending talking about the worries, because otherwise they take over. Worries are like bullies. So I like this idea to think about having an appointment with worry. So every day at a prescribed time that you agree with your child, that's when we'll talk about the things that are worrying you. And these little creatures in this image here are really useful worry eaters. There you can have them in a sort of a soft plushy version, or you can get them as a small keyring sized version that your child can carry around. And the idea behind them is that if your child has a worry, what they do is they note them down on a piece of paper. It could be a word or a sentence or a little picture. It could be anything. Something that reminds them what it is they're worrying about, and they put it in the mouth of the worry eater and zip it up for safekeeping until your appointment with worry, which is the time at which you look at the worries that your child has. So it's a good idea to think about 10 to 15 minutes each day, what feels right for you, but limit it. That's why I've put down a time frame, because you don't want this to go on and on and on and on. The whole purpose of this task is that you're containing the worry within the boundaries of one appointment every day. And you try to make it the same time each day if you possibly can. Just having that, building that into your routine is really helpful, and it will help your child to learn some of these strategies for managing anxiety as they get older and become more independent with doing so. So what you do then is you look at the worry list and you discuss them one at a time, and you keep this within the allocated time that you've got. So my recommendation is that you get yourself a little notebook or a journal, and you take the worries out one at a time, and you write the date in your journal, your diary, the date and the time that you're doing it, and you write down each worry in turn. And then together you problem solve them. You think about, what could we do about the situation that you would feel more comfortable with? So child saying, I'm worried about school tomorrow because I've got PE. Okay, so let's try to understand why you're worried about PE. Well, I'm always the last to get dressed and Mrs. telling me off because I'm slow at changing, and nobody ever wants to be my partner in the games, and we have to get into pairs. And then I'm always falling over and Mrs. telling me that I'm clumsy. So it could be a number of reasons, and these are very legitimate, and those examples I've given are from real life. They're things that actually do happen to children, so they're very common. So you're going to sit down and problem solve those together. So the first one might be about, oh, changing is a problem. So you could brainstorm all of the things that might help. So maybe we could get Velcro trainers. Maybe we could get clothes for you to wear for PE with no fastenings. Maybe you could wear your PE kit underneath your uniform, and I'll check with the teacher that that's okay. Those kind, or maybe I can check that there's an adult that would be able to help you, or maybe you can change a little bit. So you can write down all of the possible solutions to that part of the problem. So you go through each of the worries and each of the elements in turn, and you think about what could work best, and then you come up with a plan together that you both feel happy with, that you can then follow out the next day when it's time to go to PE. So these are practical solutions that you're going to come up with, and keeping a list of them is a really good idea, because you can then revisit them in time. So you can then go back the following Wednesday and look back, well, last Wednesday when you worried about PE, this is what you said and this is what we did, and how did it work out? It was good, okay, let's try that this week. Or that didn't work out because of this, that, and the other. So here's how we're going to change the plan this week. So it can be a really good idea to keep that article, that journal, so that you can look back at each entry and remind your child that, well, we did it before and we can do it again. And you could even like give them a rating out of 10. How well did it work for you? Those are really good and concrete ways to help your child to think again. And then remembering, it's so important to focus on the brave, non-anxious behavior. So make sure that you praise your child for being brave enough to talk about them and being brave enough to tackle them, and remind them about that next time. And it might even be that what you want to do is build some rewards into that feel right for you. It doesn't have to be anything that costs anything. It could just be that we'll sit down and have a game of this together once you've done it. Or that's what we'll do each week when we've done our worry list. We'll play a game of this, that, or the other, or we'll make some food together, or whatever might be rewarding for your child, so that it feels like a positive experience for you all. So that's the end of the introduction. If you want to learn more, here's some further reading for you that you will find really useful, upon which this little webinar has been based. So if you want to learn more, please do check out the website, themaysgroup.com, and we will be able to respond to any questions you have if you send us any questions in via the contact sheet from the website. Hope that was helpful. Bye. For more information, visit our website, themaysgroup.co.uk.